News, views, voices of the global Indian community. India abroad.
You know, I've worked in the private and the public sector. I served in the Obama administration, and 100%, that's one of the lessons that has, it took me a while to learn, but once I internalized it, really helped me be a better manager and leader, and just an overall person. And so, you know, the sort of focus of our discussion that we're gonna have with you is how to promote a healthy and emotionally sort of healthy and mentally healthy workplace, particularly in the public sector, right? So the public sector is different from the private sector in a number of different ways, but regarding this conversation, as many of you probably know, you know, in the public sector, whether you're at a government agency or a nonprofit, you sometimes are taking on the emotional energy of the people you're serving. You are doing this for the past 8 years or more in the context of, shall we say, a politically turbulent environment. And as you're balancing those competing demands, you have to do that sometimes in organizations that might be resource constrained. And so they might not have the Cadillac version of, you know, the health benefits or the resources that maybe a private sector organization would have. And so that's the reality in the public sector. And so burnout culture in government agencies and nonprofits is real, right? It's not just bankers and lawyers that get burnt out. And so this conversation is timely, but it's also really essential for all the work that all of you are doing. And so before Kiran and I get into it, would love to bring the audience in by a show of hands, if you could just answer a couple of questions. So by a show of hands, how many of you work in the public sector? So again, that's either government, nonprofit. Okay, a good portion of you. So again, by a show of hands, how many of you have experienced a mental health condition or know someone who has? Wonderful. Thank you. So thank you, first of all, for answering that. You know, just a reminder that, well, we're in DC, and so there's a lot of public sector folks, but also that we all have mental health, right? Just like we all have physical health and we get bumps and bruises and aches and pains. Our brain hurts from time to time, and it's just part of a human existence. That's what it is, right? So thank you all for sharing that and acknowledging that. So, you know, one of the silver linings out of the pandemic has been greater attention on mental health, right? We all sort of collectively experienced this crisis. We all suffered together, but also like our awareness was raised together. And so because of that, there's been less stigma around mental health, and workplaces started to do more work around this initiative, understanding that there's a clear business case. If you promote the mental health of your employees, you get, you know, better improvement, a better performance. And so, you know, we saw that in a bunch of private sector organizations, Salesforce and Verizon and BlackRock, just to name a few. And the companies that sort of do it the best, they have the policies, the procedures, the benefits, but they also try to, as much as possible, incentivize their leaders to talk about it. And so that's what we're going to talk about, right? This magic formula of, again, to get an emotionally healthy workplace, yes, you need the policies and procedures and benefits, but you also need the right culture and leadership. So with that, Kiran, when you were at the OPM, you did a lot of things, but relevant to this discussion, tell us a little bit more about what you were able to do regarding resources and policies that would promote the mental well-being of employees across the federal government.
You know, I think what's really interesting, and one thing that I learned to appreciate, is coming into, in particular, a government agency soon after the last administration. And so it wasn't just dealing with being in the height of the pandemic and people being afraid to come to work, like their sheer safety. Personally, for me, my experience was that morale was so incredibly low. And there was a feeling that, yes, there was a lot that needed to get done, and you do that in any beginning of administration, but honestly, people just wanted to be just feel some TLC, and just know that they're being seen and heard. So a lot of what we did was working across all the different agencies to pull up some of the best practices that were happening. We had put together a working group to determine what was happening in each of these agencies, and this was happening over a period of time. I'll say one interesting development was there was a group of federal employees who started this group called Mindful Feds. I thought that was such a cool name, actually, Mindful Feds. And so they just started holding like meditation sessions and just opening it up to everyone as a space once a week. And so we actually brought that entity and organization into OPM to be able to kind of promote it government-wide. I will say though that a big part of this is setting the tone at the top and being able to talk about it early and often about why these issues are so important. So I would have these town hall sessions where I would talk about my own personal experiences. I was very open, frankly, about the fact that, more than 20 years ago, my brother committed suicide. He was, dealing with a lot of cultural issues growing up in the South. I do think it's important to share our stories. Another part of this was, literally in every communication we did with the employees was about, here are all the different ways that, programs that are out there that we can support you. We used to joke in our front office that literally everybody had a weekly therapy session. They're like, sorry, I can't go to that meeting, I've got my weekly therapy session. And at one point I thought, like, I'm the only one not seeing a therapist? Is there something wrong with me? Because everybody was out there like on a regular basis. And when you do that at the top and you normalize that, like, it is important to support yourself, and especially in the public sector, nonprofit, these jobs are hard. Even in the private sector, these jobs are hard. And there's been a whole movement about what it means to bring your entire self to the work. So I think, again, each agency had lots of different programs, but what I saw most effective was the leaders that I was working with, even from the secretaries, everybody was talking about the support they wanted to give to their workforce. And being the largest workforce in the country, 2.2 million, we could be an example. We needed to be an example for what that looked like.
Yeah, no, that's so powerful. Thank you for sharing your story as well. And you nailed it, right? It's the combination of something like Mindful Fed, but also leaders like Kiran who are willing and brave enough to share their story. Because when you do that, it's obviously therapeutic for yourself, but you give permission to others to recognize what they may be going through, and so that they can have that recognition and then access the resources they need. And in the process, it actually strengthens the bond between you and the folks who work with you.
Can I speak to that? Because I do think a big part of this is, and you've also shared your personal story, which is like, the minute you can be vulnerable as a leader and in your organization, and to be like, you're not so like removed from everybody else, that you have these experiences that there is that connection that you start to have, not only with your workforce or your employees or your team, but also just within your community. I think it makes our community a lot stronger when we're willing to acknowledge the things that, frankly, everyone raised their hand practically in this room, and you've been doing a big part of that as well.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's, vulnerability is a word that's used a lot. We all love Brene Brown. I love Brene Brown, but really, it's when you don't understand the power of it until you actually do it. And I sort of, my big sort of moment in entering the mental health field was a little over 5 years ago. I was working at a corporate job at the time, and my family has experienced deep and significant experience with mental illness, and I kept it hidden for years, for decades really. And we all know what happens when you suppress and think you're successfully compartmentalizing. You're not. And I learned that the hard way, but I eventually made the decision and frankly had the realization that my purpose on this planet was to work in mental health. And so once I reframed that and turned the pain into purpose, it was a no-brainer. And so I didn't just want to quit my job, I wanted to tell people why, because no one knew, right? I never talked about this. And so on the way out, I told folks, this was a financial services company, and I told them I'm working in mental health. Half of them were like, WTF, what, right? But a fair number of them came up to me in private and revealed their own challenges or their loved ones' challenges with mental health. And some really, really touching and moving stories that, you know, to Kiran's point, is just such a powerful way to build trust and teamwork. So if I had stayed, actually the team that I was on, the performance probably would have increased, right? But I learned that lesson, at least in that job, too late. And so that's what modeling vulnerability does. It's good for you, it's good for the people you share your story with, and it's good just collectively and again, in our community as well. So you talked about the need for the right leadership and how you can sort of create that environment where mental health resources are seen as, you know, just a normal thing. You don't just do it in a time of crisis, right? So what else on the culture side? Like, how are you able to convince agencies to even adopt something like Mindful Fed? What were some of the other things that you were able to do around the culture and leadership piece?
I mean, I would say first off that I think we're at a point in time, post-pandemic, you know, whether you want to tie mindfulness to like better performance among your teams. I mean, I think people are realizing the benefits, whether it is getting more out of your team, or the fact is that you want to be able to support your team holistically. So I would have to say, honestly, there wasn't necessarily a lot of convincing that needed to happen. I just think we're in a moment in time that if actually you're not doing it, you're actually not a part of the progression that is happening. And I think for those who are younger, coming into the workforce, that is what they are personally looking for. That is what I've seen. Again, we've got people here from that generation, so they should speak up about what they're looking for. But it is about like, what is it? What are my, you know, personally, what are the kinds of work assignments that that I can be involved in? But at the same time, what are you doing to support me emotionally as well? And maybe that's a lot to ask of a workplace, because that's not necessarily how we grew up. You know, definitely not how our parents were. So I think again, a moment in time, there is a question about like whether we have amnesia and whether, you know, as we distance ourselves from the pandemic, whether that will continue. I think it will, because I think we understand the benefits actually, both in what we get out of our employees as far as like productivity, but also just, you know, kind of increasing the happiness index.
100%. No, the business case for doing this type of stuff in any workplace, whether it's the public or private sector, is very well established, right? From, you know, Harvard Business School on to many other organizations that have looked at this and looked at the data and showed that it helps not just on productivity, but actually recruitment, to Kiran's point, especially with the younger generation, and retention, right? It's really expensive to lose people, and so if you have the right culture, you're winning across all these different metrics in the workplace. So, you know, one of the things we talked about, Kiran, in preparing for this is, and again, we're, you know, sort of trying to hone in more on the public sector, is that some government agencies, I certainly saw this at state, and oftentimes by necessity have to be hierarchical in nature, right? So how do you promote the right type of leadership, whether it's empathetic leadership or, you know, a culture where it's okay to use mental health resources in the context of hierarchical environments?
Yeah, so I'll say, and I'm so glad that I'm like now not in government, so I can just be like totally real about this. So I think, you know, listen, in government, how many folks work in government who are here right now? Okay, not maybe a ton, maybe broader public sector, but you know, I think I've always been challenged, both being in the nonprofit and in the public sector, is that there is, it is very challenging when you constantly have to lead by fear of fear of oversight, fear of like congressional inquiry, fear of, you know, you're gonna get this wrong and, you know, your ass is gonna be on the line, whatever it is. And I think that becomes much more challenging when you have to lead from a place of fear, versus what I think is really about empathetic leadership is a place of love, which is like where there's abundance, where you're willing to take risks and take chances. You're really allowing your employees to feel free to kind of put themselves forward, to test out new ideas, to speak their mind. And that has been my constant challenge in every position that I've been in government, And I see Sue Van here, who's going to talk later, who I worked with at the White House Initiative. And I think what I appreciated when I was running the White House Initiative was that, it was like this small entity inside government. I almost kind of felt like we had our own little like nonprofit that was trying to move agencies to do different things that were important to the Asian American Pacific Islander community. But interestingly enough, I also felt like it was this rehabilitation center for feds who had lost hope in public sector. Because we would say, here, take this project and run with it. And they're like, what? You want me to do this all by myself and you're not gonna like be hovering over me? And, so I think, again, a part of I think mental health and emotional well-being is also what is the experience that you have in your workplace, because we spend so much time at work. And listen, I love government. I think public sector is a very important space, and all I did in my last job was recruit people to come in government because I think the experience is worthwhile. But I do think those of us who are there have to do a reorientation, and so I know we'll talk about this, but which is how, knowing everything that is out there, that you can orient yourself in a way that can lead from a place of empathy and support, and not always worried about okay, if I don't get this right, my ass is on the line. Because I think in that way you send that stress downstream, and you send that pressure downstream. And so that is personally what I've experienced. And I think that's it's not gonna get solved overnight, but it's one perspective.
Yeah, no, there's so much in what you just said. And now, just build on the last point you made around how your emotions are contagious in a way, especially if you're at the top. And this is, in some ways, the concept of emotional intelligence, which in my mind, in plain English, is the ability to self-regulate your own emotions and be highly sensitive to the emotions of others. And again, candidly, that took me a while to acquire that intelligence, because what it means is that when there's stressful situations, or you're working really hard, maybe operating on little sleep, you have to also be able to understand when you're triggered in negative ways, and then find healthy ways to process that so you don't take it out on others or yourself. Right? So that's the sort of self-awareness, self-regulation piece, but it also means active listening. So you're listening to folks, not just the words they're saying, but the look on their face, their body language, what they're not saying sometimes is more important. And so that's emotional intelligence, right? That's a really, really important trait of anyone, not just a leader. The other thing you touched on, that you said it so well, like an environment where folks feel okay to take little risks, right? Whether it's sharing a crazy idea, or admitting they made a mistake, or sharing a concern. That's this notion of psychological safety, which, again, has been proven out by the data to be a hallmark of a high-performing team. And so these are the things that you can do as an individual. By the way, you don't have to be a leader, right? You can model this behavior wherever you are in an organization.
I was going to say that the thing that I would do in these roles, right, as you move up, is that I would say to myself every morning, okay, literally I've got 6 or 7 meetings. Each meeting is going to be some shit I got to deal with because something's burning, or I've got to, and so I've got to bring my A game as far as being there. And there's a lot of preparation. But I said to myself, I'm going to challenge myself that when I'm in the meeting, I'm actually in the meeting. I'm actually listening, because the person who has put together 20 slides for me to review has put a lot of time and work into this. And what I find in DC that frankly infuriates the hell out of me is everyone thinks that their importance is based on how busy they are. So in these meetings, someone's on the phone or on the computer, or I gotta do this, or I gotta do that. And actually, you're a better leader if you're actually just don't do anything and just sit in the room and listen and be present. And when I would kind of have these executive meetings, I know I'm preaching, but I would have these meetings, and people would have, if were these executive meetings in the big executive conference room, and they would have their computers up, and I'm like, shut the damn computer, and just be present, because I do think I think for me, I put that on myself because I was like, I want people to know that whatever they are saying to me in that moment, they have my full attention, right? And that is, like, I see that as a part of emotional well-being. I see that as a part of, like, what is my experience in the workplace? What do I feel valued? I have had so many people say to me when I departed, like, I didn't do anything tremendous. I mean, you know, these positions are demanding, you know, and there's a lot that you try to get done. But honestly, the thing that I'm most proud of is that people who came up to me and said, you made me feel like I was seen and I was valued. And that is the biggest accomplishment I can take away from that experience. And it can be from the security guard and the cleaning staff to somebody who is in a higher level position.
That's amazing. I mean, kudos to you. We should all that's wonderful. You know, again, since this conversation is about the public sector, just wanted to bring up another point before we sort of close it out for the special guest, which is not us. I think we're pretty good.
We could have her or him join the conversation, right?
So,
yeah.
One of the other things I noticed when I was in government, again, I was only there for 3.5 years, but this was very apparent to me, is that there's much fewer carrots and sticks in the public sector than you have in the private sector to incentivize and motivate employees. So you don't have big cash options or stock bonuses or huge pay raises on the carrot side, and on the stick side, there's less too to impose accountability. And so in that context, how do you drive a high performance culture? How do you get your colleagues to cooperate with you and do things you want them to do? Because yes, you want a supportive culture. Yes, you absolutely want an empathetic culture, but you also want excellence and a high performing culture. And so what I was told initially at state, whenever I would encounter an obstacle, is like, just tell them you're the senior advisor to, you know, so-and-so. You know, basically they were telling me to pull rank, which is not my personality, but it's also not something you can do more than a few times, right? You do that a couple of times and you just, you know, people stop paying attention. It doesn't work. And so I wanted to succeed over the long term, over my entire tenure there. And so that requires a lot of the things we're talking about, which is being empathetic, authentically understanding the perspective of the folks you're dealing with, who are oftentimes, especially if you're political, they're civil servants that work there for decades, really understanding their motivations, their perspectives, being generous with who you give credit to, right? That's really, really important.
Thank all the time, thank people all the time.
Yes, 100%. And so that's kind of, again, that's another form of emotional and relational intelligence. These are also things that are what you need to have an emotionally healthy workplace. And so, you know, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that in terms of how to, again, have a supportive culture, but also make sure you're driving excellence and a high-performing culture and driving accountability.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that, you know, leading an agency in the federal government was like literally the hardest thing I've ever had to do, and the hardest job I've ever had. And I will tell you, coming in as like, you know, the first South Asian to lead this agency was just like a huge thing that I carried on my shoulders personally. And I had to, it took me a while, I'll admit, like there was a bit of the imposter syndrome of like, how the hell did I get here? Like, was a very hard ride, honestly, through confirmation. I was told, like, you need to get Republican support. I couldn't get Republican support because of my work around equity, and so I was also told, don't be the first like tie vote for the VP, and I was like, I don't know what you want me to do. Like, this is like my only path forward. So, you know, I carried a lot of that with me coming in, and you know, I think I realized over time a couple of things. One is, like, the most powerful leader you can be is just honestly just be yourself and just be an authentic leader. So here's who I am, like flaws and all, and you know, I'm going to try my best to be a really present leader. And I think what people also really appreciated was that I don't think I really, you know, fully accounted for was the role that you play, being the first, or leading an organization, people want to see themselves in you, and I think I heard from a lot of women of color, about how I defined for them about how they could show up as a leader, which is, I don't have to be the person in the room that knows the most, is the smartest. Like, I can lead in a different way, and that's okay. And that was I feel my contribution as a woman of color leader, that it's like, we can own the style and the way that we want to show up, and that can be powerful. And I think representation does matter in these roles, and if I hope that leads, a trail for many others to come into these roles in government and really feel like that they can be their complete selves, their entire history of who they are. I mean, we brought Diwali to my agency. We, all these things. I just embodied what that meant to be who I am, and talked about my family and my history. My parents, their own history after the partition. And these are the stories that make us who we are, And so I think that was the biggest thing for me, was in that moment in time and in this experience of what it means to be a woman of color, what it means to define that leadership, and all that we have talked about are all the things that I feel that I've learned along the way. And so just really appreciate you kind of giving a place to talk about that, and also the contributions that you've made as well.
Thank you, and thank you to you as well. It's so beautiful. So to wrap it up, a lot of the sort of best practices around workplace mental health will tell you, as we've discussed, right, that yes, the policies and benefits important, but ultimately the culture and the leadership are the things that are going to really ensure success. And probably most importantly, the leadership, and ideally it should stem from the top, right? So in the private sector, it's the CEO that should either be publicly supporting it or sharing their own story if they have one, and we all kind of do if you think about it, right? So that's the business side. On the government side, having a leader like Kiran is obviously incredibly powerful and important, but we also have a president who's the CEO, effectively, of the federal government, who is very open about his interior emotional life and his experience with grief. And so what does that mean for you and for everyone who's serving in government and beyond?
Yeah, I mean, I think he did, I do think he definitely sets the tone of like what he expects from, his leadership, whether it's a cabinet or sub-cabinet. And he is someone who is extremely personable and extremely empathetic, and if you see, you do have a level of dedication among the team. And I mean, really, literally every principal at all these agencies are approachable, care deeply about their workforce. I've talked with most of them, and you can see that level of authenticity. It might be a different style, but there's a level of openness, and I think that is set at the top. Even if it's not something he's managing day to day, at the end of the day, it's all about your teams, and that's how we thought about it in the administration. Was you may be asking President Biden to lead, but at the end of the day, actually look at the team a person brings in, because the president has a role, but he's not doing all the stuff that's happening around the government, right? I mean, it's everybody else. And so oftentimes when we think about elections, you think about this person, they've got they've got a big role, but look at the people that they attract and bring in, and if they are quality people who care about being in the role for the right reasons, and not because it's something I can put on my resume or whatever. I think, and I learned that actually from a couple of the secretaries, in particular Secretary Vilsack, when we were sitting down, and he already did 2 terms in the Obama administration and came back again. And it is because he cares deeply about the people in his agency, and what we're able to do. And I think that just speaks volumes.
That's incredible. Yeah, I mean, I can tell you, watching President Biden when he talks about his family story, or even the stutter that he overcame as a kid, I mean, that's the definition, right, of vulnerability, of authenticity, and it is really powerful. It's really, really